My dearest friend, let me tell you, there's a story simmering inside me, one that's been tucked away like a faded photograph in an old shoebox, just waiting for the right moment to see the light of day. It's about a time in my life, a decade really, when I learned firsthand that sometimes the devil wears a collar, and the holiest of vows can lead you straight into your own personal hell. I still remember the smell of ocean salt and honeysuckle from my porch in Cape May, just yesterday it feels like, when I finally started to make sense of it all. How a vibrant schoolteacher named Ellie Mae, who loved the chatter of children in Springfield, Massachusetts, became Sister Eleanor, the quiet wife of Reverend Josiah Albright. You see, I was 32 back in '72, feeling like a dusty old book on a forgotten shelf. And my mama, bless her soul, she just wanted me settled, safe. Then came the Reverend Josiah, a man with a voice like honeyed sermons and eyes that promised a life of purpose. He found me in Harmony Creek, Ohio, at the Assembly of Renewed Faith, and I, naive soul that I was, believed he was the answer to all my silent prayers. He called me his helpmate, his essential partner in ministry. And when he asked for my hand that December, I accepted, grateful, never imagining that I was walking not into a future of shared faith, but into a gilded cage of control and quiet despair. That marriage, you see, it was a slow poison, like a creeping vine that chokes the life out of a tender sapling. One day, you're looking at a pretty green shoot, and the next, it's nothing but dried up leaves. I was 33 when we tied the knot, and before I knew it, my teaching career, my passion, was gone. "Your ministry is here, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice firm, his words cloaked in a piety that stung more than any shout. Every opinion, every whisper of my old self, he'd swat down with a Bible verse, twisted and turned until I felt like a spiritual failure. My money, my friends, even my dear sister Lucy, he severed those ties one by one, always with a righteous smile, always with a scripture ready to justify his grip. The first time his hand found my face, it wasn't a loud crack, but a soft thud, a sound that echoed not in the room, but in my soul. That was 8 months after we said "I do." After that, I learned to cover the bruises with long sleeves and forced smiles, a secret I kept even from myself. But in my hidden diary under the loose floorboard by the bed, I etched the slow, painful erasure of Ellie Mae, replaced by a ghost named Sister Eleanor. If you're just joining my story, honey, and it's tugging at your heart, make sure you hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to unravel the rest of what I hid for so long. You know, it's funny how life plays tricks on you. You think you're walking down one path, steady and true, and then, bam, you're on a whole different road, and it's one you never even knew existed. For me, that road, it led straight to a kind of hell I never imagined. It all started with a simple thought. A whisper in the back of my mind that grew louder and louder until it was a roar. I married the pastor, and I met hell. That's the bitter truth of it. It's a hard pill to swallow, even after all these years, to admit that the very person I vowed to spend my life with, in the eyes of God and man, became the one who stripped away everything I held dear. I remember thinking, after the wedding, how my life was finally going to be what Mama always prayed for. Stable, secure, respectable. I was Sister Eleanor, the pastor's wife. It sounded so grand, didn't it? But soon enough, that grand title felt like a cage. Josiah, he had this way of talking, always so smooth, so full of grace and biblical verses. But underneath it all, there was this current, a cold, dark river flowing right through him. He'd say things like, "A wife's purpose is to support her husband's ministry, Eleanor." And then, a few days later, he'd suggest, ever so gently, that maybe my teaching job was taking away from my true calling. It wasn't a demand at first, just a suggestion, wrapped up in sweet words about sacrifice and devotion. But those suggestions, they chipped away at me, piece by piece, until I didn't even recognize the woman looking back at me in the mirror. I loved teaching, you see, loved the smell of chalk dust and old books, the bright eyes of children eager to learn. It was my passion, my joy. But Josiah, he saw it as a distraction. He'd quote scripture, twisting it just enough to make me feel small, unfaithful, like I was somehow letting God down by wanting to share knowledge with little ones. "The Lord requires full devotion, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice resonating with authority, making me feel like my heart was a battlefield between my own desires and what I was told was God's will. And when you're constantly told your own thoughts and feelings are wrong, that they're not godly, you start to believe it. You start to doubt yourself, every little thing. It wasn't just my job either. It was my money too. He took control of it, to manage our household more efficiently, he said. And my sister, Lucy, who was my rock, my confidant. He slowly, subtly, made sure we drifted apart. "She fills your head with worldly ideas, Eleanor," he'd murmur, looking at me with those piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. It was like he was systematically dismantling my world, brick by painful brick, leaving me with nothing but him and his version of faith. The fear, it started as a tiny seed, sprouting slowly in the dark corners of my mind. A fear of disappointing him, of disappointing God, of being utterly alone. One evening, I remember it like it was yesterday, he came home agitated. Something about the church finances, a problem with a donation. I tried to offer a suggestion, a simple idea to help. His eyes narrowed, and he raised his hand. Not to strike me then, not yet, but just to emphasize his point, to silence me. The air went thick with tension, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was the moment I truly understood, deep down in my bones, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The man I had married, the man who was supposed to be my protector, was becoming my tormentor. And it was then that everything began to unravel. You know, even in the darkest corners of a life that felt like it was shrinking by the day, sometimes a tiny flicker of light finds its way in. For me, that light came in the form of Mrs. Clara Thompson. She was new to Harmony Creek, a retired university professor, a widow with a sharp mind and eyes that seemed to see right through all the polite smiles and hidden hurts. She joined our church, and at first, I just saw her as another new face in the congregation, someone Josiah would try to impress. But there was something about her, a quiet strength, a way she held herself that was different from the other women. I remember the first time we truly spoke. It was after a Sunday service, a sweltering July afternoon in 1975, the kind of heat that presses down on you, making even the air feel thick. I was helping tidy up the hymnals, trying to make myself scarce before Josiah could find another task for me, when Mrs. Clara approached. Her voice was soft, like rustling leaves in autumn, but firm. "Sister Eleanor," she said. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly seen. "That was quite a sermon today, wasn't it?" she mused, but there was a knowing glint in her eyes that hinted she wasn't just talking about the sermon. She saw the weariness in my smile, the way I flinched slightly when Josiah's voice boomed from the back of the church. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Clara made it a point to seek me out. After church, at the community bake sales, she'd always be there, a gentle presence. She'd start by lending me books, not the usual religious tracts Josiah favored, but novels, poetry, even some philosophy. I'd sneak them into the house, hiding them under my mattress, devouring them late at night when Josiah was deep in his study, communing with the Lord. The feel of those pages, the smell of old paper and ink, it was like breathing fresh air after being suffocated. Our conversations started subtly, too. We'd talk about the books, about the characters, about life beyond Harmony Creek. She'd ask me about my past, about my teaching, and her questions weren't judgmental. They were genuinely curious. "Ellie Mae," she'd call me, using my old name, the one I hadn't heard in so long it felt foreign on my tongue. It was like she was peeling back the layers Josiah had wrapped around me, revealing the real me underneath. One afternoon, while we were sitting on her porch, the only place I felt truly safe to speak freely, she looked at me, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "fear does not come from God, and the love of Christ. It is never controlling." Those words, they hit me like a lightning bolt, shaking something loose deep inside me. All this time, Josiah had used fear, had twisted the very idea of God's love into a tool for his own power. But Mrs. Clara, she was showing me a different path, a different kind of faith. It was a revelation, a profound shift in my understanding. This kind, gentle woman, who seemed to float through life with such grace, was quietly chipping away at the foundation of my prison. I started to see Josiah's ministry not as a holy calling, but as a carefully constructed performance designed to keep everyone, especially me, under his thumb. And the most shocking part? I realized in that moment that Mrs. Clara had known all along what was happening to me. She hadn't said anything directly, not at first, but her quiet kindness, her choice of books, her gentle questions, they were all leading me to this very understanding. I didn't know then that this quiet woman, with her wise eyes and her library, would become my greatest ally in the battle for my own soul. I just knew that when I was with her, I could breathe. And I didn't know yet how much I would come to rely on her quiet strength, and how much danger that reliance would put us both in. I didn't know that my conversations with her would be the first step towards a freedom I desperately craved. And I certainly didn't know that she, with all her wisdom, was hiding a secret of her own, one that would change everything. You know, there's a quiet language that passes between people, even when no words are spoken. It's in the way someone looks at you, the way they hold themselves, the way a shared silence can feel more meaningful than 1,000 conversations. After those first talks with Mrs. Clara, it was like a little seed of defiance had been planted deep inside me. A tiny flicker of the Ellie Mae I used to be, trying to push through the hard ground Josiah had laid over my spirit. Our encounters, as I came to think of them, became my lifeline. They weren't grand affairs, mind you, just quiet moments. Sometimes it was a shared glance across the crowded church hall, a slight nod of understanding that only we seemed to notice. Other times, it was a longer chat after a women's Bible study where Mrs. Clara would skillfully steer the conversation away from Josiah's rigid interpretations and towards the broader, more compassionate aspects of faith. I remember one crisp autumn afternoon, the leaves in Harmony Creek blazing in shades of amber and crimson, how she invited me for tea on her porch, the smell of freshly brewed chamomile, the faint scent of old books from her living room. It was a sanctuary. We talked about everything and nothing, about the small-town gossip, about the beauty of the turning seasons, about books, but beneath the surface, there was always that quiet exchange of understanding, a sense that she knew the weight I carried. I started to feel this pull, this internal struggle that was almost unbearable. My mind, trained by years of Josiah's teachings, told me that my duty was to him, to the church, to a life of quiet submission. But my heart, stirred by Mrs. Clara's gentle wisdom, whispered about freedom, about the vibrant woman I once was, about the teacher who missed the joy of a child's bright mind. It was a constant battle, a tug of war between what society, and especially Josiah, expected of me, and what I, deep down, truly yearned for. Every shared cup of tea, every book she loaned me, every gentle encouragement to think for myself, felt like a tiny act of rebellion. And then, one blustery spring day, just as the first crocuses were pushing through the cold earth, something happened that nearly stopped my heart. I was at the town's small general store, picking up some staples for the parsonage, when I heard Mrs. Henderson, a notorious busybody with ears like a bat, whispering to Mrs. Gable by the canned goods aisle. They didn't see me, hidden behind a stack of flour sacks. "Did you see Sister Eleanor with that Mrs. Thompson again?" "Mrs." Henderson hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Always together, always talking low. It's not natural, a pastor's wife spending so much time with a university woman. You know how those types are, full of modern ideas." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me, about Mrs. Clara. The quiet glances, the tea on the porch. It hadn't been as secret as I thought. The judgmental eyes of Harmony Creek were watching, and the whispers, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, were already beginning to spread. The comfortable anonymity I had found in Mrs. Clara's company was shattered. I knew, in that moment, that I was stepping onto dangerous ground. The path I was on, the quiet rebellion I was nurturing, it was being noticed. And in a town like Harmony Creek, where appearances were everything and reputation was fragile as glass, being noticed for the wrong reasons could be devastating. But the strange thing was, even with the knot of fear in my stomach, a different feeling surfaced too. A defiance, a flicker of courage. I had glimpsed a different way of being, a life where my mind wasn't shackled. And even though the whispers were starting, even though I knew I was treading a perilous line, I found I couldn't stop. The yearning for my own self, for a life where I could breathe freely, was becoming stronger than the fear of what Josiah, or the town, might do. I just didn't know yet how far I'd have to go and what truly irreversible step I was about to take. The air in Harmony Creek often felt heavy, thick with unspoken judgments and the weight of expectations. But for me, the heaviest burden was the one I carried inside, the slow, agonizing death of my own spirit under Josiah's thumb. Every day was a performance, a carefully orchestrated dance of smiles and feigned agreement, while inside, the real Ellie Mae was screaming to break free. Mrs. Clara's words, "Fear does not come from God," they echoed in my mind like a sacred hymn, challenging everything Josiah had built around me. And the more I heard them, the more I read the books she loaned me, the more a quiet resolve began to harden inside me. I was tired of being a ghost in my own life. It was 1976, and I was 37 years old, feeling every single one of those years pressing down on me. I knew I needed more than just quiet conversations and borrowed books. I needed a way out, a way to reclaim myself, piece by precious piece. My first thought, naturally, was to go back to what I knew, what I loved, teaching. I decided I would try to take on some private tutoring students. It was a small step, a tentative reach for independence, but it felt monumental. I put out a few discreet feelers, talked to some old acquaintances from my teaching days before Josiah had me quit. A few days later, a mother from down the road, whose child was struggling with arithmetic, called me, almost whispering, asking if I could help. My heart leapt. But Josiah, he had eyes everywhere, or so it seemed. Or perhaps the truth was, his control was so absolute, his grip so tight that any flicker of my own will was immediately sensed. I remember the evening I told him about the tutoring possibility. I tried to make it sound like it would benefit his ministry, a way to serve the community, to show our dedication. His face, usually so composed, tightened. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet, almost too quiet, "your focus must remain on your duties here. The Lord provides. We do not need the meager earnings of a private tutor to sustain us. Such worldly pursuits only distract from your spiritual growth." He didn't raise his voice, not then, but the implication was clear, cold as a winter stone. My independence was a threat. He crushed that little spark of hope, just like he had so many others. He reinforced my isolation, not with shouts, but with that chilling, pious calm, yet a stubbornness, a trait my mama always said I got from my grandma, began to bloom. If I couldn't teach openly, then I'd find another way. A tiny advertisement in the town's weekly paper for a typist for hire, discreet services, it caught my eye. It was for a small, dusty law office on the outskirts of town, one that rarely had church members passing through. I made a secret call, went for a secret interview, and started working late afternoons, after Josiah was typically engrossed in his sermons or church business. The rattle of the typewriter keys, the smell of fresh ink and carbon paper, it was a different kind of freedom. It was exhausting, sneaking around, inventing excuses for my absences. But every dollar I earned, tucked away in a hidden nook in my apron pocket, felt like a tiny victory. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was proof that I could still provide for myself, that I wasn't entirely dependent on him, that freedom wasn't just a distant dream, but a tangible, achievable reality. This secret job, these small acts of defiance, they fueled me. They were tiny cracks in the wall of his control, letting in slivers of light. I was tired of living in the shadows, tired of being Sister Eleanor. The old Ellie Mae, the one who taught children and laughed freely, she was starting to stir. I didn't know how far I could push it, how much I could risk, but that persistent whisper from Mrs. Clara about fear not being from God, it had taken root. I was gathering my strength, slowly, painstakingly, and I had no idea that the next revelation, born from another's suffering, would give me the undeniable courage to finally break free, to stop whispering and start shouting for my life. You know, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, especially when you think you've just about hit rock bottom. After getting that secret typing job, a little bit of the old Ellie Mae started to hum inside me again. It wasn't a loud song, not yet, but a quiet tune of hope. I was still Sister Eleanor to the world, putting on my polite smile and nodding at Josiah's pronouncements. But inside, I was carefully collecting those precious dollars like scattered pearls for a future I was starting to believe could actually be mine. Then came another twist, one that felt like a gift from above, though it was wrapped in sorrow. Mrs. Clara, bless her heart, she started to fade. Her gentle energy, usually so steady, began to waver. Her heart, she told me one afternoon, was giving her trouble. It was 1977. I was 37. And watching her, so full of wisdom and quiet strength, grow weaker, stirred something fierce in me. She had given me so much without ever asking for a thing. She had opened my eyes to a different kind of faith, one that was about love and freedom, not control and fear. One chilly March evening, she called me to her small, cozy home. The air smelled of wood smoke and her medicinal teas. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a knitted shawl, and her eyes, though tired, still held that sharp, knowing sparkle. "Eleanor," she said, her voice softer than usual, "there's something I want you to have. It's an application, and I've already paid the fee for your first semester." She handed me a crumpled envelope. Inside was an enrollment form for night classes at the local community college, a course in literature, of all things. My heart did a flip. Go back to school? Me? At my age? It felt like a wild, impossible dream, but Mrs. Clara just smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Knowledge is power, child, and the world outside these walls is waiting for you to rediscover it." Returning to a classroom, even a small, stuffy one at night, after so many years, was like stepping into a different universe. The scent of old textbooks and new ideas, the quiet hum of students taking notes, it was intoxicating. For a few hours each week, I wasn't Sister Eleanor, the pastor's wife. I was simply Eleanor, a student, eager to learn, to absorb, to be myself. It was in one of those classes, during a discussion about social changes, that I first heard about the recent approval of no-fault divorce laws in the United States. The words hit me like a revelation, echoing what Mrs. Clara had always subtly hinted at. There was a way out, a legal, legitimate way to escape the cage Josiah had built around me. It wasn't just a whispered hope anymore. It was a concrete possibility. But the path to freedom is rarely smooth, is it? Just as this new hope was blossoming, Josiah's world started to crumble, and his temper, always simmering beneath the surface, began to boil over. He was obsessed with building a grand new temple for his assembly of renewed faith, pouring all our savings and even taking out risky loans into its construction. By June of 1978, the project was plagued with financial troubles, and Josiah was like a caged animal. His rage exploded one evening over dinner, the kind of terrifying outburst that left me shaking, fearing for my life. And then, just a few days later, came the bombshell. I found out, not from Josiah, but from a tearful, terrified young woman named Sarah, his secretary, that she was pregnant with Josiah's child, and he had forced her to get an abortion. Sarah, broken and desperate, had tried to take her own life, and in the hospital, between sobs, she asked to see me. When I sat by her bedside, listening to her whispered confessions, the dam inside me broke. His hypocrisy, his cruelty, his utter disregard for the very faith he preached, it all came crashing down on me. Sarah's pain, her shattered innocence, it gave me a clarity I hadn't possessed before. All those years of fear, of submission, of believing I was spiritually deficient because I couldn't meet his impossible standards, it was all a lie. The man of God was a monster, and his ministry was a sham built on control and deceit. Sarah's voice, frail but resolute, telling me she wanted justice, was the final push I needed. There was no going back now. My quiet rebellion was about to become a roaring storm. You know, there comes a point in a person's life when enough is simply enough. For me, that point hit me like a revelation right there in that sterile hospital room, looking at Sarah's broken body and listening to her hushed, terrified whispers. Josiah, the man who preached about redemption and purity, was a hypocrite, a predator in a pastor's robe. And in that moment, all the fear, all the years of quiet suffering burned away, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. It was June of 1978, and I was 38 years old, a woman reborn from the ashes of her own despair. I remember walking out of that hospital, the harsh afternoon sun feeling strangely bright on my face, and heading straight back to the parsonage. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat of anger and determination. I found Josiah in his study, poring over blueprints for his ridiculous temple, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to hit his carefully constructed world. I walked in, my voice surprisingly steady, considering the hurricane raging inside me. "We need to talk, Josiah," I said, my gaze locked on his. He looked up, annoyed, a flicker of that familiar condescension in his eyes. He probably expected me to ask about dinner or some church matter, but I didn't. I told him, clearly and calmly, that I knew about Sarah, about the pregnancy, about the abortion. And the silence that followed was deafening, thicker than any sermon he had ever preached. His face drained of color, his carefully composed mask crumbling, revealing the terrified little man beneath. He stammered, tried to deny, to bluster, to twist the blame, but I cut him off. "I want a divorce, Josiah," I said, the words feeling like pure, sweet freedom on my tongue. "And I want my share of everything. Or I will go to the deacons, I will go to the police, and I will tell everyone in Harmony Creek exactly what kind of man of God you truly are." The threat hung in the air, potent and undeniable. His career, his reputation, his grand temple, all of it could come crashing down. He paced, he raged, he pleaded, but I stood my ground. My voice was quiet, but my will was unyielding. He knew I meant it. He saw it in my eyes, the end of my fear. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only an hour, he finally conceded, defeated. The great Reverend Josiah Albright, reduced to a desperate man cornered by his own lies. Leaving Harmony Creek was a bittersweet escape. I packed a small suitcase, leaving behind the shell of Sister Eleanor, and took a bus to Newark, New Jersey, where my dear sister Lucy was waiting for me with open arms. The relief was immense, like shedding a skin I had worn for too long. But the fear, though lessened, still lingered. Josiah tried to track me down, sending vague, threatening letters to Lucy's address. But Lucy, my fierce protector, stood firm. She had seen through Josiah long ago, and she knew the true depths of his depravity. She was my anchor in that turbulent sea. I found a teaching job surprisingly quickly, pouring all my newfound energy into it. Being back in a classroom, feeling the joy of learning with children again, it was pure balm for my bruised soul. And then, another truth unfolded. A quiet, profound one. Mrs. Clara passed away just a few months after I left Harmony Creek. It was heartbreaking, but not entirely unexpected. And in her will, she left me a small but significant savings account, money I never knew she had, along with a key to a safe deposit box. Inside that box, I found a letter from her, detailing her own struggles with a controlling spouse, a man who, much like Josiah, had used faith to manipulate. And she wrote, "Eleanor, use this to truly live. Your freedom is your greatest ministry." It was a final, powerful affirmation, a message from beyond the grave that my liberation wasn't just for me, but a testament to the strength we find when we dare to reclaim our lives. Her secret, her own past, was revealed in that moment, making her even more of a guiding light. It strengthened my conviction that my liberation was a profound act of respect for life itself. And the biggest surprise of all, the safe deposit box contained not just money, but documents detailing other quiet acts of rebellion she had made throughout her life, small victories against oppression, all of which now encouraged me to continue my fight. Look, gaining freedom from a cage, even one you helped build around yourself, isn't like flipping a switch. It's more like slowly learning to breathe again after holding your breath for years. Even after leaving Harmony Creek, with Josiah's threats fading into the rearview mirror, and Mrs. Clara's quiet legacy bolstering my spirit, there were still shadows. The echoes of his words, the feeling of his eyes on me, they lingered. He tried to keep tabs, of course. A phone call here, a letter there, always through some unsuspecting church member who didn't know the monster he truly was. But Lucy, bless her unwavering spirit, she became my fierce gatekeeper, shielding me from his attempts to pull me back into his orbit. My days in Newark settled into a rhythm that felt both healing and exhilarating. The teaching job, it wasn't just a job. It was a reclamation. Standing in front of those bright-eyed children, sharing stories and numbers and the wonders of the world, it reminded me of the Ellie Mae who had been lost for so long. Their innocent questions, their eager faces, they were a balm to my soul, helping to wash away the bitterness of the past. I poured myself into my students, finding a renewed purpose in nurturing their young minds. But life, as it always does, kept turning. It was March of 1979 when the divorce was finally, legally, undeniably finalized. 39 years old and a free woman. It felt strange, almost surreal. The relief was immense, like a giant weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but there was also this vast, empty space where fear used to live. What did a free woman do with all that space? I decided to fill it with more learning. Remembering Mrs. Clara's gift, I enrolled in the pedagogy program at the university. Going back to school, really going back, was a deep dive into myself, into a part of me I thought was gone forever. It was a commitment to my own growth, a silent promise to Ellie Mae that I would never let her shrink again. It was during this time, sitting in a late-night lecture, that I had a profound realization. All those years, Josiah had used faith, twisted it to control me. He had used it to justify his abuse, to isolate me, to make me doubt my own worth, and for a long time, I had believed him. I had blamed God. I had blamed myself. But now, learning, growing, and being surrounded by people who saw faith as something beautiful and liberating, I began to reconstruct my own relationship with it. I found a small, ecumenical community, a quiet little church not far from Lucy's house, where the sermons were about compassion, about love, about genuine human connection, not about rigid rules and judgmental pronouncements. It was a place where my faith, battered and bruised, could finally heal and flourish, free from the shadow of Josiah's control. But here's the thing about leaving a toxic past behind. It doesn't just disappear. Sometimes it throws a last, desperate punch. One afternoon, while I was grading papers, the phone rang. It was one of Josiah's old deacons from Harmony Creek, a man named Mr. Peterson, his voice hushed and frantic. He said that Josiah had been caught in a new scandal, a massive financial embezzlement scheme involving the very temple he had been so desperate to build. The construction had halted, the church funds were gone, and the congregation was in an uproar. He had lost everything, his influence, his reputation, his ministry. And then Mr. Peterson dropped the bombshell. Sarah, the secretary, driven to desperation by the public shame and Josiah's continued harassment, had spoken out. She had told the authorities and everyone who would listen about the abortion, about his abuse. The town, once so quick to judge me, was now turning on him. The very lies Josiah had used to crush others were now crushing him. It was a shocking twist, the universe delivering its own kind of justice, and a chilling reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds a way to surface. Gotta say, sometimes, when you've been through a storm and you finally see the sun breaking through the clouds, you almost can't believe it. Hearing about Josiah's downfall, about his embezzlement and Sarah's courage in speaking out, it felt like a karmic wave had finally crashed over him. It wasn't the kind of revenge I ever sought, but it was a quiet satisfaction to know that the truth, like a persistent weed, had finally broken through the cracks of his lies. It was a stark reminder that even the most carefully constructed facades eventually crumble. Life in Newark, far from the suffocating judgment of Harmony Creek, was a breath of fresh air, literally. I was a full-time student again, and a part-time teacher, juggling books and lesson plans with a newfound energy. The smells of the city, Hot pretzels from street vendors, the faint scent of diesel from the buses, the crisp Atlantic air coming off the bay. They were different from the sweet, stifling aromas of Harmony Creek. They were the smells of possibility, of a world much bigger than the one I had known. I was learning so much, not just from my classes, but from the world around me. I started talking to other women in my program, some older, some younger, all with their own stories, their own battles fought and won. We'd share coffees in the bustling student union, and I'd listen, really listen, to their struggles. And slowly, carefully, I began to share parts of my own story, the parts I had kept locked away for so long. The fear of judgment, the shame of being the pastor's divorced wife, it began to lessen. I realized that my story wasn't just my story. It was a thread in a much larger tapestry of women finding their voices, breaking free from chains, seen and unseen. But even as I blossomed, there was still a lingering ache, a raw spot where my trust had been broken. It was one thing to be free from Josiah, but quite another to truly trust again, especially in matters of the heart. I had built up so many walls, so many defenses, convinced that intimacy only led to control. I saw other women in my classes, some finding new relationships, and a part of me longed for that connection, that gentle companionship. But another part, the one still bruised and wary, held back, a quiet voice whispering, "Don't be foolish again, Eleanor." The possibility of true vulnerability, of truly letting someone in, felt like the greatest risk of all. Then came another unexpected turn, a small event that shifted my perspective in a profound way. I was clearing out some old boxes in Lucy's attic, boxes she'd kept for me since I moved to Newark. Tucked away in a dusty old trunk, underneath some faded linens, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't mine. It belonged to my grandmother, Mama May, the woman my mother always said I took after, especially my stubborn streak. I had never seen it before. As I flipped through its brittle pages, I saw familiar handwriting, but the words were a shock. It was her own secret history, a testament to her quiet strength. She had written about a man she loved, a man who, much like Josiah, had tried to diminish her spirit, to keep her small. But unlike me, she never married him. She walked away, choosing her independence, even when it meant defying her family and facing a lifetime of unspoken judgment in our small, conservative community. My grandmother, whom I had always seen as a sturdy, unyielding figure, had a secret, a quiet rebellion of her own. Her story was a hidden gem, revealing a deeper connection to my own lineage of resilience. It was a testament to the strength that ran in our blood, a courage that had been passed down through generations. This revelation, finding my grandmother's secret story, it hit me like a powerful tide. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern, a quiet battle fought by women for generations, for their own space, their own voices. It wasn't a weakness to want freedom. It was a legacy. And in that moment, something shifted within me. The fear of being vulnerable, the hesitation to truly live again, it began to dissipate. My grandmother's story wasn't just a discovery. It was a quiet, powerful call to action. It showed me that the strength I was finding wasn't just my own. It was a torch passed down, and it was my turn to carry it forward, to shine a light for others who might be struggling in their own quiet hells. And I knew then that my journey, my escape, was not just about my own healing, but about honoring the silent battles of those who came before me, and perhaps inspiring those who would come after. Truth be told, finding my grandmother's journal, it wasn't just a discovery. It was like getting a secret message from the past, a silent push from a woman I barely knew, but suddenly understood deeply. It made me realize that my journey wasn't just about escaping Josiah. It was about honoring a long line of women who'd fought their own quiet battles for dignity and selfhood. The fear that had lived in my bones for so long, it started to loosen its grip, replaced by a quiet, steady courage. Life in Newark continued to unfold in ways I never could have imagined back in Harmony Creek. I was thriving in my pedagogy classes, soaking up every bit of knowledge like a dry sponge. The professors, the other students, They were all so different from the narrow world Josiah had trapped me in. They challenged me, encouraged me to think critically, to voice my own opinions without fear of judgment. It was like I was learning to speak again, not just with my voice, but with my whole being. My relationship with my sister Lucy also deepened in ways it hadn't been able to before. We'd always been close, but with Josiah's control gone, we could truly be sisters again, sharing laughs and tears, remembering our childhood in a way that felt free and uncomplicated. She was my biggest cheerleader, celebrating every small victory, every passing grade, every new step I took towards rebuilding my life. She'd sit with me in the evenings, a cup of tea in hand, and just listen as I talked about my classes, about my new friends, about the possibilities that were opening up. But even with all this newfound freedom and support, there was still a piece of me that felt unfinished. It was the part that had been so deeply scarred by Josiah's twisted version of faith. I was finding solace in my new ecumenical community, yes, but there was a quiet, almost imperceptible pull back to a different kind of ministry. Not the kind Josiah preached, full of judgment and control, but a ministry of healing, of guidance for others who might be trapped in their own quiet hells. I kept thinking about Sarah, about her broken spirit, about how many other women out there might be suffering in silence, believing they were alone. It became clear to me that I couldn't just walk away from my past completely. I had to use what I had learned, the hard-won wisdom, to help others. It was a difficult decision, because it meant confronting those painful memories head-on, opening old wounds to let them truly heal. It meant stepping out of my comfortable, safe new life and daring to speak out, to risk being misunderstood or judged again. But the thought of another woman, another Ellie Mae, living through what I had, it was a torment I couldn't ignore. Then, a surprising thing happened that sealed my decision. One of my professors, a kind older woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes, asked me if I'd be interested in becoming a teaching assistant for her Women in Society seminar. It was a class that explored the challenges women faced in different eras, including issues of domestic abuse and patriarchal control. It was as if the universe was giving me a sign, a direct path to use my experience for good. It felt like the right choice, the only choice. I knew then that my journey wasn't just about healing myself. It was about becoming a beacon for others, a voice for the voiceless. The fear of reliving my past for others to hear was still there, a tiny knot in my stomach, but the urge to help, to share, to empower was stronger. I decided then and there that I would confront my past head-on, not just for myself, but for every woman who needed to hear that escape was possible. I didn't know how I would do it, or what it would truly entail, but I knew I had to try. My quiet life in Newark was about to become something much more public and much more impactful than I ever anticipated. I remember it like it was yesterday. There are moments in life when everything converges, when all the threads of your past, your present, and your uncertain future twist together into a single breathtaking knot. For me, that moment wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow-burning realization that had been building since I left Harmony Creek. It was the decision to truly use my story, to speak about the hell I lived through, not just for my own healing, but for others. And that decision led me to a path I never expected, becoming a mentor, a guide for women trapped just like I had been. It started small, with quiet conversations after Dr. Hayes's Women in Society seminars. Students, and sometimes even other older women attending as auditors, would linger, asking questions, sharing their own quiet doubts about relationships, about faith, about feeling trapped. I found myself instinctively offering advice, sharing snippets of my own journey without giving away all the painful details. It was like a new kind of teaching, one that came not from textbooks, but from the raw, lived experience of my own heart. But the biggest step, the one that truly brought me to the precipice, came when Dr. Hayes invited me to speak at a regional conference for women's empowerment. The theme was Finding Your Voice, Resilience in Adversity. My stomach churned at the thought. Standing in front of hundreds of strangers, laying bare the most vulnerable parts of my past, the years of abuse, the shame, the fear of a man who preached God's word while inflicting such cruelty. It felt impossible. My hands would tremble just thinking about it. The old fear, that suffocating grip, tried to creep back in. What would people think? Would they judge me? Would they believe Josiah's lies over my truth? I remember the night before the conference. I couldn't sleep. Lucy sat with me, holding my hand, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "Ellie Mae," she whispered, using my old name, the one that now felt like a badge of honor. "Your story isn't just yours anymore. It's a lamp for someone else's dark path. Don't let fear blow out that flame." Her words, simple and true, were the anchor I needed. And then I picked up Grandma May's journal, running my fingers over the faded leather. Her quiet rebellion, her unspoken courage, it flowed through me like a current. I realized that my own voice, once silenced, could now be a powerful tool, not just for me, but for all the women who were still whispering in the dark. The next morning, as I stood backstage, waiting for my name to be called, my heart was a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The room was packed, a sea of faces, all looking up at the stage. When my name was announced, Eleanor Vance. A quiet gasp escaped my lips. I walked out, bathed in the bright stage lights, and for a moment I saw nothing but a blur. But then I looked out, and my eyes landed on a few faces in the crowd. Women I had quietly mentored, women who had shared their own struggles with me. Their eyes held a mixture of hope and fear, just like mine. And in that instant, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them. It was about all of us. I took a deep breath and I began to speak. I didn't mince words. I talked about Ellie Mae, the vibrant teacher. I talked about Sister Eleanor, the pastor's wife, and I talked about the hell I met. I spoke of Josiah's control, his twisted scripture, the isolation, the hidden bruises, the gradual erosion of my spirit. The room was utterly silent, hanging on every word. I spoke of Mrs. Clara, my beacon of light, and the quiet strength she gave me. I spoke of Sarah, her pain, and how her courage in revealing the truth gave me the final push I needed to break free. I spoke of Lucy, my unwavering sister, and my grandmother, Mama May, whose secret journal showed me that resilience ran in my very blood. As I spoke, the words flowed, not just from my mouth, but from a deep, ancient place within me. I felt vulnerable, yes, raw and exposed, but I also felt incredibly powerful. I wasn't just recounting a story, I was weaving a tapestry of truth, of pain, and ultimately, of triumph. And then, as I reached the part about finally leaving Harmony Creek, about the divorce and Josiah's public downfall, a murmur rippled through the audience. A woman in the front row gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. The murmurs grew louder, whispers filling the room, and I paused, confused. Suddenly, a woman stood up in the back, her voice clear and strong despite the emotion trembling within it. "Eleanor!" she cried out. "It's me, Sarah!" My heart nearly stopped. Sarah, the secretary, the young woman whose life Josiah had almost destroyed, was there in the audience. And then she said something that shocked me to my core, something I had never known. "I followed your story, Eleanor, after you left. You inspired me. You were my strength when I had none. And you know what else? Mrs. Clara. She was my aunt. She told me about you, about her plans to help you, before she passed. She made me promise to find you." The revelation hit me like a wave. Mrs. Clara, my quiet mentor, had been Sarah's aunt all along. And she had orchestrated their meeting, weaving a delicate web of support and defiance that had led us both to this moment. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a powerful, deliberate act of love and solidarity across generations. It was a testament to Mrs. Clara's quiet genius, her ability to see the connections and forge the path to freedom for both of us. I thought I had known the full story, but this changed everything. It wasn't just my fight. It was our fight, a legacy of quiet warriors standing up to oppression. I looked at Sarah, then back at the faces in the crowd, and a profound sense of purpose washed over me. I thought that moment on stage, confronting my past, was the climax. But this unexpected connection, this shared history with Sarah through Mrs. Clara, was the true revelation, proving that even in the darkest times, there are always unseen allies, always threads of hope connecting us. I thought that was the end of my story. But it was really just the beginning of a new kind of power. Let me tell you, life has a funny way of weaving its threads, connecting people in ways you never could imagine. Standing on that stage, looking at Sarah, realizing that Mrs. Clara, my quiet savior, had been her aunt and had orchestrated our paths. It was a profound moment. It wasn't just a revelation. It was a powerful validation, a testament to the unseen forces that guide us, to the quiet heroes who work behind the scenes. The universe, it seems, has its own intricate plans for justice and connection. After that conference, everything changed again, but this time, it was a change filled with purpose and light. Sarah and I, we reconnected in a way that only two survivors of the same storm can. We spent hours talking, sharing our stories, piecing together the true depths of Josiah's depravity. Her courage, her willingness to speak out even after all she'd suffered, it inspired me profoundly. We became fierce allies, two women who had walked through hell and come out on the other side, ready to shine a light for others still lost in the dark. My work as a mentor grew organically. I started holding small, informal gatherings in my apartment, then at the community center, for women who were grappling with abusive relationships, especially those cloaked in religious piety. We talked about how faith should lift you up, not weigh you down. We discussed how true love promotes freedom, not control. I taught them that the fear they felt wasn't from God, and that their worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval, especially not a man who twisted scripture for his own gain. It wasn't about tearing down faith, but about rebuilding it on a foundation of truth, compassion, and self-respect. More than 40 years have passed since I first stepped onto that bus, leaving Harmony Creek behind. I'm 85 now, sitting in my favorite armchair here in Cape May, the Atlantic Ocean stretching out endlessly before me. It's funny how time makes things clearer, how the sharp edges of pain soften into wisdom. I married again, you know. Arthur. He was a kind, gentle soul, a quiet man, with no religious pretensions, who loved me for who I was, Ellie Mae, with all my scars and all my strength. We had a beautiful daughter, Miriam, who grew up knowing her mother's story, knowing the importance of standing firm in her own truth. And Josiah? His grand temple was never finished. The financial scandals, coupled with Sarah's testimony and the stories that finally started to trickle out from other women, stripped him of everything. His ministry crumbled, his congregation scattered, and he ended his days a forgotten, lonely man, stripped of the power he craved, the justice that felt so elusive for so long. It found him in the end. Looking back, that hell I lived through, it wasn't my destination. It was a brutal, agonizing journey that taught me everything. It taught me the true meaning of resilience, the quiet power of my own voice, and the immense courage it takes to reclaim your life. It taught me that sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the deepest self-discovery, and it taught me that the paradise isn't some grand, unattainable heaven, but the quiet joy of simple moments, the peace of a free heart, and the profound freedom of simply being yourself. I learned that life doesn't have an age limit for new beginnings, that courage triumphs over fear, and that even when the world turns its back, you can find the strength to move forward, stronger than ever before. My dearest friend, if my story has touched you, if it has stirred something within you, remember this. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And your freedom, whether from a person or a belief that holds you back, is a sacred right. This is how I found my way back to myself, learning that true faith promotes humanity. It doesn't destroy it. If my story moved you, share your own story. Speak up. Join us, because every voice matters. And together, we can heal. I'm still here, and I want to hear what you think. And tell me, what city are you watching this from? I'd love to know where my words are reaching.